Hi all, Wind here. So in today's video, I wanted to share a design that I'm hoping it would help kind of improve your release notes ability in the way of automating some of the release notes that we provide to users or stakeholders or product managers essentially on ServiceNow with some of the ServiceNow data. So I wanted to show a customization that could support that build, and it's a very simple design, and I will go through it today. This solution does depend on how your organization manages release notes and how you make it visible, so it might not be the best fit for your organization or roadmap, but essentially I'm hoping this will provide some cool functionality that could help kind of spur other ideas that might support you in your business, or if you would like to use kind of knowledge articles as release notes using some of the data in ServiceNow, this might be the video for you. So hopefully it helps, and let's get into it. So before we kind of jump into the design, I will talk about three things. So essentially kind of some of the prerequisites, and then essentially the implementation, and then essentially the end result and what that looks like. So firstly, if we look at this plugin, this is one of the prerequisites. Essentially, we do need a few specific tables and modules for this to essentially work. We're essentially using the release table as well as the stories around it. So this is at the very least the plugin that you will require, Agile Development 2.0, and we've got the plugin ID there on the bottom of this of that title. Now, there are other plugins that could provide further functionality, but I would say this is essentially the very least privileged plugin that you would require for this to essentially provide the tables you need. Great, so that's covered. So I'm just going to show you a very quick article I generated just on kind of what the design kind of entails. So it's very simple. It's essentially just one script that kind of creates our content, and that's essentially the implementation. But for that to work, we do need a few pre-requirements as part of the build. So essentially, the first thing, we do need to add the out-the-box related list change request to parent, and that's the out-the-box kind of relationship, and I'll showcase how that looks like and how that works. But it's very simple to essentially add this out-of-the-box related list to your release release record. Then we'll look to create a custom UI action. We would need about 3 system properties, I believe, but we'll go over that during the implementation side to essentially populate the values. Now, using system properties are best practice rather than hard coding the values, and we'll kind of showcase what that looks like as well. And then essentially to create a field on the release table, so this will be a custom field to essentially contain that reference knowledge article that we're looking to create. And I will call this out in the implementation, but we are looking to create a draft knowledge article because essentially it would still be good for an author to review it and then essentially submit if they are happy with the wording or if there's some stories missed. So it's always good to have that check, but it is up to you if you want to push it through the workflow. That is your prerogative. But yeah, and then essentially the last field is to essentially create the script within that UI action that essentially generates the relevant content, and we'll go over that script and what it would look like as well. So firstly, let's start off with the release record. Create a few releases here, but I'll just create a new one just to showcase this. So some of the fields that we would require here, so if I select new again, it seems to be stuck. Okay, let me just refresh this page, try once more. Okay, the new button seems to be stuck here. Okay, so we'll just use one. Okay, it took a little bit of time. Thank you guys for being patient. So a few things that we'll essentially need here to help with the content is the plan start date and end date. It's not required, but it's great to have, and we could put this in the knowledge article as well. So let me just say I look to do it on the Friday, and essentially we'll finish on the Sunday as an example. And essentially I'll put in my short description. So this is release demo channel as an example, and as you can see, I've got my field release notes. Like, you could make this read only, but there's a reason why we haven't, and I'll showcase that in a second. But you can make it read only if you don't want this particular functionality to appear. So I'll show that in a moment. Okay, see if there be some performance issues, but that's fine. Okay, so test release notes. So essentially we've got everything that we want. I'm going to make this comment as well just to make it clear, and I'll submit this for now. So at this moment in time, all we've done is essentially just submitted our release record. As you can see, we've got the custom release notes field added in. I will just showcase what that looks like in order to essentially build that, but it's very simple. So essentially, if we just go to the form design, okay, and essentially our release notes over here. So if I just select this, great. So yeah, we just call it release notes. That's a custom table, so we always use U for custom table just to kind of identify it. And essentially, it's a type reference, and it goes straight into referencing the knowledge table, so the KB knowledge table. If you have a different table for knowledge, if you're using templates, then it's up to you if you want to change that to that particular table, or you can just kind of keep it at that root table, kind of up to you and your design. But that's essentially the field that we require here, just to show how you would essentially create this if it's not clear to you. So if I just go to field types and I look at reference, grab the reference here, and essentially from here I can open the cog and I can just call it to, just name this as you like, and essentially type reference, find your knowledge table, and there we go. It should be good. Now you can make it read only, as I said before, but yeah, that's essentially it. But this name will be very crucial for the build, as we'll need to reference it, and that's essentially it. Now I'm going to undo it because we've already got the field, but I just want to showcase how you could build that easily on form design. Yeah, let's just come out of this essentially. Okay, so we got the release demo for the channel. So there's a few things now I want to show. So essentially, this related list here, change requests. This is one we've added that's out of the box, and we could use this to essentially map a change request to a release, and that will help us to kind of apply that into our content. So again, to show how you can add this, so configure relate lists, and essentially when you are here, essentially be able to search for change requests, and it will be kind of under here as change request to payment. So this is kind of the one you want. I've already added it, that's why it's not available, but it will be selectable here. So essentially just move it over like you would do with this one as an example, and that should be pretty much it. Now the way it works, so I could either create a new or an edit. So I'm actually going to edit, and I'm going to select one change. So I would select the first one, just for the demo purposes, and essentially we can see here that the parent of the change is now the release record. So that's essentially how ServiceNow has defined that relationship, and we use that to put essentially content into our article. The other thing to add is this should be out of the box with stories. You could add products if you like as well, but for now we're just going to add a few stories to essentially say these are the following stories that will be part of the release. So if we move that in, and we've added 3 demo stories just to showcase that. So essentially now I've got my release, and I'm happy with the contents that I've applied essentially in terms of those data points and those relations. Now what we will do is we need to create the UI action. So the UI action, as you can see here, I've essentially created this and it's below. So let's just jump into kind of the UI action itself. Now, just to show how you would essentially create this, if you just go to configure again, essentially click on UI actions, you can then select new and be able to essentially build your UI action here. So let this load, and then I'll just jump into the one we've already created. Okay, perfect. So I'll go over kind of what is required for the build, but essentially this is how you get to this page. So let me just go back to the release record for later, and essentially this is our UI action. So let's scroll up. So table will be auto-populated if you go through the route that I suggested. We give it a name, we give it an order essentially, and then we define on the right here, it's very important, which kind of visibility we would want it to kind of show on. So if we want it to be a form button, kind of similar to like these, we can select form button. If we want it to be from the context menu, which is essentially from here, then we can add that in for that particular table, or we could have a form link. So I've kind of done context menu and form link. I think these two are quite nice to have for this particular functionality, but you can change it based on your design. Okay. Of course, we want to make it active, and then additionally you can even show an insert update. For this functionality, it doesn't make sense to essentially do an insert because you kind of want it to be created the release record with the additional content related to it, and then someone will be able to select it rather than selecting release notes that is on a new record that hasn't actually been defined yet. So I think just to kind of define that, and then essentially you can create a hint for the record, so you get like a nice tooltip, and essentially the condition to who can actually click this button. So if we just use comment.can_write, this kind of looks at the ACLs of who can actually write to the release table out of the box, or if you've configured ACLs for that particular thing. So I think it's a good condition to have, because anyone who could write to release notes should have the ability to essentially create release notes from it. But you could change that accordingly if you'd only want a certain group with a certain role. You can essentially put the current user has to have this particular role, so you could modify this accordingly. Now we'll go into the script, and we will kind of jump into the knowledge properties on this basis and then come back to the script. But essentially the first function is to essentially create the attached knowledge article, and this is where we essentially initialize the knowledge article record, and then we set the following fields. So we set the knowledge base, we set the category, we set the ownership group, the author, and the short description. So based on these fields, we'll be using system properties, but for the author essentially we'll be using the current assigned to whoever the person is actually the assigned to of the release, is the person that is the author. Now you can change that accordingly. It's just variable, so yeah, up to you, but just to show how this could work. So let's quickly show kind of one of the properties, just so we can showcase how this would look like. So if we go to, let's go back to our friends, and okay, so I'm just gonna do a contains release, and we can see the following properties. So just to kind of slow down how I got there, so essentially I know the table name, so this is kind of a cheat sheet. So if I know the table name, I can essentially go to the table and then dot list, and it'll give me the list records of the table. So now I'm in this table. If I select just like release KB ownership, so essentially we're just defining the knowledge base of which this should be kind of the ownership of, and essentially we just hard code a sysid in here, but we're doing a system property, we can just call that property rather than hard coding in the script. So it is kind of better practice to do so. So just a few things to watch out for. So yeah, that's essentially the sys properties. If you do need any more information on that, please do let me know. But yeah, very simple to essentially set that up. Okay, and then essentially what we do is we generate the article content. So once we essentially initialize the record, we essentially look to generate the article content. And then essentially over here, we would insert the KB article and attach it to the release record. So once the article is generated from a function below, which we will show, we essentially create the article and it will live in that release notes record that, or release notes field that we created on the release table. Okay, so we've also added some notification to users, just like a pop-up message to say this is your knowledge article that's been created, it's been drafted, this is the following record, essentially providing a link to it. And then just to kind of catch else, if for whatever reason it has not been created, we can just add in some message to say that it's failed to create. Okay, so now just kind of scrolling down. So essentially the next thing we would look to do is generate the article content, and this is the function for it. So as we scroll down here, the first things first, we're just going to add some release record details. So we're going to add the current release number and kind of anything else we essentially need to add from the release record, so we can kind of take over from the short description. But for the time being, we've just added essentially the number of the release. Then additionally, we've added change requests. So if we want to essentially find what change requests are attached to the release, now we've essentially just looked to add one, but you could change this condition to essentially kind of do a loop to find all the change requests if it's attached. It just depends on how your organization works with releases to change requests, but in this scenario, we'll just look to say it's a one-to-one relationship. So one release should look to have one change request based on our organization plan. Okay, and as you can see, we're adding content and we're adding kind of the HTML tags to essentially just give it some style. So you can change this accordingly, but just to provide some of those stylings that we'll see in a moment. Then we look to add the release date and description. So over here, we're essentially looking to get that current end date to essentially explain when this release date will be kind of completed. So that's why the start date and end date were required. Essentially, they're not mandatory out of the box. You can make them mandatory, or if they're not provided, it would just be empty. So it's up to you how you do want to kind of modify that to provide that. Okay, and then just building the content. So as we scroll down, we're now going to look to generate the release stories. So essentially, we do a glide query into our story table, and we just find out all of the stories where the release is matching our current releases ID. And then essentially we build up the content. So if the story record has next and we continue going on, we essentially build out the release stories, build out the content here, and then we do our while loop to essentially populate each story within this table row that we're building and columns with the following product, story ID, title, related demands, related request items, related enhancement, related defects. And all of these we essentially can query from the story table. So it just gives us that data driven approach essentially. So over here, we essentially build out our story record. So we build out our content on essentially the styling we want, getting the content from the short description of the story, and anything else we need. I think one design decision you do have to decide is what fields you want in. You don't want to add everything, especially description and acceptance criteria. It could be very long depending on certain stories, and especially if the content is not reader friendly. It might be difficult to kind of provide that standard across the board. So it might be just good to provide a short description to just give quick insight to what stories there are, but to provide links into the stories for anyone who has the access to be able to view it. So it's up to you what fields you want to add, but yeah, this should give you kind of the bare bones to basically be able to add to that. Right, so essentially then, once we finish our content, we essentially just go down and look to generate any related records. So, we talked about kind of enhancements and requests and stories. So essentially we just do a function, get the table name, and look to find if there's any records that kind of relate to that particular parent. record. So there would be the story as the parent record, and just seeing if there's any enhancements or defects that could essentially be attached to that you want to call out in this table. And then essentially we just generate related records with the styling, just to kind of add. And then the last function, just to kind of explain it, it's just to provide some nice footer content with some kind of message. So for example, with each release, we aim to deliver more efficient and feature-rich ServiceNow platform experience to our users. Appreciate our continued support feedback as we strive to improve service further. You could add much more content to that. You could add the link to the knowledge base, or ways to essentially provide subscription to the knowledge base. But yeah, just an example of kind of the way we could add some messaging to the bottom of the knowledge article. So that's actually UI action, kind of function by function. So hope that makes sense. What we will do now is just kind of look at the end result. So let's go back to our release demo. So I'm just going to reload this. So do a quick check. So we've got a start date, we got an end date. We have our stories that are related to it, and we got our change requests. So now if I select this create release notes, so we do get this business rule. I haven't checked to understand what this business rule is actually skipping, but essentially it looks to notify about articles checkout. So I think we're fine for the time being. I don't think it causes any impact. So I'm just gonna kind of scroll away from that. But if you did see it before, there was that kind of notification around the article being created, but we could also see it here. So now, if this was read-only, essentially this preview record this button would be missing. So it's up to you if you kind of want to hide that. But essentially, you want to be able to go to the record itself. And as you can see, we've got our knowledge article. Now, I'm just going to view this article to showcase what it looks like. So as we can see here, we've got our short description that's come from the release, essentially, short description, or the title of the article that's come from the short description of the release. Then we have our release record, where if I select this, it will take me to the release record, similar to the change request. So if we just select this, as we see, it's taking me to the change request directly. We got our release date, so essentially that end date that essentially tells us when this is going to end. Our description, so this is coming from our release record, and then essentially our table that we've populated with the stories, the short description of the stories. Essentially, you could provide links to the stories here, but essentially, if they go to the release, they will be able to see all the stories below. So it just depends on how user-friendly you'd want to be on this particular design. And then essentially, as you can see, we've got our footer note here. Now, I do want to call out this is in draft. So as I kind of highlighted before, it's up to you. You do want to kind of push it automatically to publish, but you could also have an instant publish on the knowledge base. So there's many ways to essentially push this through the knowledge article, but just for this design, we expect the author, or essentially someone who's overseeing this, to review it and then essentially push it for publishing. So that's essentially the build, and I hope that this functionality helped in some way. Yeah, please let me know if you have any questions, and happy to help. Thank you. Bye.